We have Alex here with us. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I know that this has been a long time coming. We've been trying to organize a time and it hasn't just worked out, but once again, all in divine timing. So this one's going to be once again a bit of a just freestyle pod. We're just going to navigate it really intuitively. By the way, I love all of the content that you write on Facebook as well. A lot of it really hits home for me. I really resonate with a lot of it, and I really love the sovereign integral process
hmm
that you try to implement in your work as well. So you've got experience, with a lot of different things. You mentioned that you've got a psychology major. So I also believe that you're quite in tune with not just, the grounded logical aspect of spirituality as well, but then you've also got this metaphysical, more spiritual side to it. So I would love to just hear your experience. Maybe firstly, starting off with something that we both know a lot about, which is Keylontic Science, or
hmm
however that sort of was initiated into the beginning of your journey. And then,
hmm
of course, feel free to share whatever you want to share with that.
Sure. Yeah. It's a pleasure to be here, by the way. I'm glad we finally got it together. It's been a long time in the making, but I think everything happens in that divine right timing, as some people say.
Yes, divine right
S-
order.
right. So, yeah, like a lot of us, we just always kind of had this knack for spirituality or just something under the surface that we always maybe felt in tune and connected with ever since I was a kid, which made life a little hard and a little bit different. I was very empathic. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. And then somewhere around high school, I kind of went under this depression. I got super kind of disconnected and just, like a lot of us, we get disillusioned with the world that we're growing up into. So I developed a lot of like this rational, logical sense of thinking. And I even went through my phase of like trying to debunk a lot of the mystical and the metaphysical just because I thought New Ageism was like so cheesy, or maybe I wanted to distance myself from some of my family members, but it never really felt like I was truly away from that part of me. So as time went on, I just kind of put that aside, wanted to live a normal life as much as possible, like party it up. And I still did, but there was always this part of me that was pulling me back. So eventually I did, and I just started exploring and, just going full into that part of me that, researching and just meeting other people and talking. And something began to unfold, super at an accelerated rate. It was like just, I mean, it built up, but then there was just a point where it literally just, I don't know even what you want to call it, but it was just a gnosis or a knowing that was, I guess, a high frequency event, but it was not just internal spiritual in the heart, but it's my entire body too. And it lasted like a good week, the feeling. It was just like this pure something, beingness, knowingness, and a lot came through at that moment. And
Mhm.
so I kind of went through it, and then there's a lot that just came through in terms of, what we're going through as a species, as humanity, what we're here to do, what I'm here to do. I don't know specifically like of the purpose at a perfect granular level, but that I was part of that process. And I try to find other people like me. And at the time, unlike now, like we can all just go on TikTok and all that. We're all talking about on Facebook and everything. Back then, it was still kind of taboo. So, you had to find maybe some obscure message board forum or whatever. And then you realize there's a lot of people studying all this stuff. And I've always been interested in metaphysical. I've always had an idea that kind of Jesus was a mystic, even when I was a little kid in Catholic class. And so I kind of just began studying, and a lot of the platforms and stuff I was on was very diverse. As people kind of like, Indigo, as people that are kind of just naturally in tune, but still kind of researching just like me, and then kind of new to a lot of this information. And then others that were like into the occult, from all the way from Western to Eastern and Freemasonry, all this stuff. And at the time, all that was like negative to me. So, but I always had a part of me that was open to learn more from different people's perspectives. So yeah, Kelontics kind of came along at some point. I don't even remember how I found it. I think I was on vacation. I was just looking into things, and it really resonated with me at that time because the idea that science and spirituality were one thing was always huge for me. I always believed that was true. The idea that there was a structure and a mechanics and a source of all things, that all made perfect sense, and that there's, stages of frequency, and that a lot of the geometry makes sense, right? And the 12 structure and how the chakras like, are conceptualized. I thought that was all true. And I'm like, this is even more advanced than other stuff like yoga, with the seven chakras. And little did I know, I mean, that their stuff is there's more internal work, but we'll get into that later. But yeah, so I thought that was cool. And also it incorporated things about other civilizations and a more multidimensional cosmic thing that I thought that came through a lot for me when I had that awakening. So I thought like this is like really tuning in or expressing something that I've always known or felt. And now like there's these words and these ideas and there's these teachings. So I was super into just looking into it and communicating with others who were going into it. And yeah, the rest is history, as I say. Well, you get kind of get really into it, and it becomes almost like super stimulating, and it can kind of take over a little bit. And there were other things, which we'll get into if you want. That kind of broke me out of it, meeting different people and
Mm,
learning the difference between the theory and the inner process to actually get to those things. And
mm,
my opinion, a lot of it is missing or from Keylontics, and not maybe deliberately. I'm not saying it's deliberately or not, but there's no problem with connecting with different things together that I think at the core are universal. And I
mhm.
had to explore things that I was being told were sometimes were bad or that were compromised. And I think everything in this world is compromised just by the human nature to corrupt it. And there's nothing in this world, in my opinion, that's like the most perfect, pure thing ever. And
Yeah, that's right. I
you
mean,
know,
I don't think that we are really allowed to have the absolute truth anyway, because that would mean like full empowerment of humanity and full collapse of all systems.
exactly.
So that was another thing that for me, it was, I mean, and look, it took me a while to get to this realization anyway within myself. Like I was in this work for a couple of years, but then it clicked at me at one stage, and I'm like, look, whether or not it was benign or malign or whatever, benevolent or malevolent purposes. Either way, even if it was the speaker or the forces or the controllers of this whole situation, it would have still been delivered in a way where it didn't have the absolute truth for that reason. And
Yeah.
that is also like a Kabbalah trick, you know what I mean? And I know that,
Mm,
the Great White Brotherhood and the Kabbalah, these are all different factions. Some are light, some are good, some are,
mm,
it's like there's lesser evils in everything. But like you
yeah.
said, it gets to a point where you realize that at the end of the day, the only truth and the real wisdom is something that is born from within.
Mm,
And yeah, I was even talking
100%.
to a couple of my friends this morning where I was like, we can literally manufacture our own meditations, craft your own meditation, create your
Yes.
own
Yes.
protections, and with your own spirit and,
Yes.
that eternal sovereign nature of things, that becomes infinitely times more powerful than anything
I
else that
agree.
can be provided to us.
100%.
Sorry to
I agree.
interrupt. I just wanted to put that out
No, no,
there.
you're not interrupting at all. I love that. I mean, please, anytime. Like, this is
Yeah.
awesome. I 100% agree. I was actually just thinking about what you just said right now. And, we talked a little bit about the egregores. And
Mm,
I just, based on I just kind of put my core knowledge of how I believe everything works. And I just create my own techniques,
mm-hmm,
and they can be very simple because the power of the quantum aspect of our minds and our body and our subconscious is so great that just using simple visualizations, a concept of, let's say, a sun above my head represents source or whatever.
mm,
And I inhale and I bring it into me and bring it down through into the core of the earth. You will experience something because that with your intent, you told the universe and your own body and your own energy field and your quantum mind what you want out of it. But
mm-hmm,
someone else might conceptualize that as an all-seeing eye in a triangle because to them it doesn't mean something evil, or someone else might conceptualize it as Jesus, but they might have the same effect. And
mm-hmm,
so that's awesome because we can create something that works for us, that's subjective to us, but we're kind of able to accomplish similar things. And that
mm,
also, I think, is a good lesson in the sense that, like, for me, this is, been my experience that, like you said, sometimes you see something that resonated in the past that doesn't resonate as much anymore. And so the aspect that you're tuning into is different. So you might use a different technology, a teacher of mine, we call these soft technologies. You
mm,
engineer your own version of a technique that works for you, but you're trying to accomplish the same thing that a lot of other people are. Like there is a core mechanics to how things work, right? You do have an energy field, you got the kundalini, whatever, the shushuma up the spine. But how you can access that and work with it can be entirely up to you and how you choose to do so. And some systems may do one part better that someone else created, right? And some might do something else better. And I find that fascinating. It's like you look at all this stuff
mm,
in yoga, even in Kabbalah and other stuff, there's like all kinds of different things that accomplish similar aims, but have very different cultural lenses in which they made it work.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think
Absolutely.
that's cool.
And would you be down or open to sharing a little bit about your interactions with N and a little bit of what you learned on that side of things? Because I think that you were mentioning that they had their own style of technology or conceptualizations with, this side of things as well. So I think it
Yep.
would be interesting to kind of just put other perspectives out there as well for the public, so we're able to sort of connect the dots and meet in the
Yes.
middle somewhere because even with
Absolutely.
like the wing maker material, for example, I know a lot of people like demonize it because, Ashiana demonizes it. And look, like
Yeah.
I can understand that there's, the website might have been hijacked and there's distortions, but there are little bits of truth that I resonated with. For example,
Yes.
the sovereign integral process, even though it sounds a little bit like robotic, whatever,
Hmm.
but I
Yeah. Like a
understand the
technical.
core. Yeah, a bit technical, but I understand the core meaning behind it because I believe
Mm.
that that's something that is coming back to humanity as well, is that
Yes.
remembrance of sovereignty and
Yes.
of the eternal self. So yeah, I would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is I love that. That's one of my favorite things to talk about and to explore from. It's kind of a different set of terminology for really something timeless and ancient. Yeah, so and without going into names or anything, I kind of got very familiar with some of the people that were behind the original two interviews and a lot of the content in it. And there's a lot of interesting information. This was in the 90s, and they were talking about things that are kind of starting to become popular now, way before a lot of others did, and from a very grounded, almost technical sense. It's like a lot of when people start talking about like metaphysics or secret societies or control groups or aliens even it can get very like almost comic book like, but the first time that this man was a scientist, so the way he talked about it was like very grounded and very logical, but still tapping into the spiritual part of what he was discovering, this character Neruda. And Neruda, might be a fictional, might be a real person, it might be a representative of someone that actually existed, or maybe some details were changed. There's all kinds of theories. But what I learned from some of the individuals that were behind the original two interviews was the sovereign integral, at least, and this I put a lot of this myself together. It just makes perfect sense. Sovereign means, sovereign spiritually, right? The true us, the I am, as people call it, the core of our awareness. And then integral means the collective. So,
Mm,
and to be honest, it's kind of a modern version of what people call Christ consciousness, right? And I know that that's kind of been hijacked by New Age. It's become very fluffy. And it's like, oh, we're all one. And they don't really go into some of the more nuance of what that means at a planetary, collective, and individual level. And it goes back to what some of the Gnostics taught, what some of the Buddhists and the yogis, and that there is an I am, a self, if you want to call it that. I mean, they don't like using the word self because when you hear self, you think about the ego or your personality that you are now, but this eternal beingness within us
mm,
that exists independently of all our thoughts and ideas and beliefs and religions. And it's extremely simple in concept to achieve or to integrate with, but it's very difficult to do in this world, right? Everyone talks about these inversions and these programs and da 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 da, our monkey
mm,
mind, right? Whether you want to think that was deliberately engineered or we just evolved this way, either way, we're in the situation that we're in. So what I thought was powerful and a little bit different from what I learned from other things, whether it's Keylontics or some a metaphysical thing or even Eastern, was there was a lot of emphasis on the wonders of the body and how important the body was in this process of integration. I've come to discover also another, I guess, paradigm, some that were kind of occulted or there was a time where you had to hide these things and symbols because it wasn't allowed. And it was also persecuted. But the idea of creating a light body, for example, is we always think of it like something separate from not we, I'm just some people separate from the body or chakras or this, but incarnation is a very vital part of the energetic development of these energetic sheaths and restoration of the template that we're in. So in a way, the knowledge was in integrating the above, below, the mind, the body, the heart, and the soul. And the sovereign integral process is sort of the disengineering or almost the breaking of the matrix from within. And I think that's very important because the more I study like Buddhism and all these different things, I kind of went away from it because I'm like, that's too simple or the words are really outdated. But now I'm understanding it and I'm working on translating a little bit of those terms into our modern terminology. And that is that we talk about multidimensional mechanics and awareness and stuff like that, but the way through was always in, literally. I mean, it sounds cheesy, the ascension
Mm,
process. The deeper you go into lower levels of not frequency, but brainwave,
mm,
right? The more it's almost like a stillness, but it's not really stillness, it's an expansion that happens. The closer you get to breaking through 3D, you know. So right now, especially when I was really into more intellectual ascension type stuff, I was like, oh, you get all this information, blah, 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 and that's great. It's very stimulating, but without that inward ascension, the drop deeper and deeper into the well of your soul, this can just become, a labyrinth that you just loop and loop around. And so back to what you were saying, what did I learn that was different? Well, the process of developing higher abilities is using a part of our body mind that's not necessarily in the cortical brain. There's a theory of three or four brains. It's more so in the gut, the heart, their cells are connective tissues, and they have this capability to know things, to
mm,
interface with information, right? What we call remote viewing, manifestation, all these things. And it's a brain that can be educated. And so there's actually a process that was taught in these old mystery schools where you merge that inner intuition. Because for most of us, I mean, especially for me, when I'm very analytical and in my head, I had all this theory, but I didn't realize that the theory was so different. Like I could learn all these mechanics about manifestation mentally, but the process of actually doing it was very, it's like they used to have a word for it named grok, which is Greek, I believe. And now it's funny that Elon Musk hijacked that term. We'll talk about that
I was
later.
gonna say,
We'll talk about that later. But yeah,
yeah.
so you kind of you get you learn to integrate your inner visualization. You're dropping levels into deeper forms of awareness, which is, by the way, very different, right? And I'll just use
Mm,
science to elucidate this. But you go to alpha, right? That's like 7 to 11 hertz, something like that. That's when you're just chilling, right? You're just I'm in the ocean, and you get relaxed, and you feel connected, or you don't feel stress. I
mm,
think that's also where our intuition begins to get a little bit more active. And then you get to theta, and that's usually you're asleep at that point, or you're
mm,
drifting in between. But people who meditate or who willingly choose to develop this, they're conscious. It's the art of remaining conscious in states that you're normally unconscious. And
mm,
then your whole internal world changes. There's a whole that you have to learn to navigate that world, and it's very different and confusing. And your mind tries to interfere and go, "Duh, duh, duh, duh," So it's like there's a whole way to familiarizing yourself with it. It's like, colors are a little deeper, textures, feelings, or your subconscious exaggerates things, right? When you're in dreams, for example. And then delta, is they call it the dreamless sleep when you sleep. And that's closer to like the void, the silence. The cycles in your brain are almost like death. And once you get through that, that's when you start getting into higher dimensional kind of stuff. But at that point, you can't conceptualize that or put it into words.
mm,
You can talk about the geometry and the mechanics verbally, but the actual internal experience of it is completely different. So back to that idea, what I learned that was different, that if you want to manifest or get into these deeper levels of these skills that were taught ancient times, but today in a different context, you have to go through that kind of intuitive grok process. And there's a way to then merge that with your visualization and your daily life so that you're kind of operating on, that potential, that monstrous potential of the unconscious mind is filtering into your reality at a little bit more, like your intent is capable of touching it, as
mm,
opposed to right now, which we're all kind of on autopilot, or we're overthinking, or we're doing this, and it's hard.
mm,
And ironically, and just to kind of end this little bit, when I met someone who could walk the talk, and what are the beginning stages to get there? It was like basically mindfulness. I was just so used to Keylontics and all this other stuff. I'm like, but I want like all this super cool,
mm,
complex stuff. And you have to learn to stand or even just sit or crawl before you can,
mm.
ascend, if you will, or climb the ladder,
100%. I mean,
you
like,
know?
I feel like part of our human condition is the fact that as a human, we want the formula to things. Like, we want
Mm,
someone to say, okay, if you take these steps, you're able to have this because that's how the 3D world is designed. It's like,
exactly.
if you go to school, you'll have education. If you go to this job, you'll have money to eat. So it's like we need to have a formula we don't feel worthy unless we are like working towards something that's like, clearly formulated in front of us. And I
Exactly.
think that's just a metaphor for the whole situation. But
No,
that's
you're
how
right.
I feel, a lot of these teachings. out there are making us, because there's so many different, like gurus and teachers and this and that now, and, all these different teachings. And a lot of them do provide value of some sort.
Totally.
But like you said, I think that it's such an internal process. And I love the word ascension, because I feel like that's probably the closest word to what this means. It's like your own remembrance, finding your authentic truth, living in your truth, being your authentic self. And, not many people can do that, because people are either trying to, deceive others. They want to manipulate, even like spiritual people and everything, who call themselves like ascended masters and who
Hmm.
portray themselves as like this love and light, Christic, blood, twin flame blood. It's like, fair enough, these people might have like a good intention deep down, but there's a line where as soon as you start to kind of manipulate people or deceive people in order to gain something for yourself, it becomes selfishness. Your DNA picks up on that too. Like our DNA knows when we're not living in our truth. Our
I
DNA
agree.
knows when we're lying. Our DNA knows, our spirit knows. And so then that's going to reflect back onto you, and you're going to stop your own DNA activation process. And I feel like that's something that was missing from the freedom teachings as well, because in my mind, the process of activating DNA is a process of like spiritual initiation as well. Like your own spirit initiates you into like circumstances, scenarios, whatever situations and experiences where you will be tested in order to see if you're able to go to this next level of understanding, consciousness expansion, abundance, whatever you want it to be. It's one of those things where it is all about going within and learning your own truth, learning who
Hmm.
you really are, so then you can actually better navigate the spiritual world. I mean, like I went into Keylontic Science without any of these understandings, without any of these rememberings, or like, like without having like a really strong core wisdom about myself. And I was like what you said, I was constantly up here like, numbers,
I get it.
mechanics, ratios, ascension
Yep.
path, evac passages, everything was just, I was
What's
constantly,
compromise? What's not, you know?
yeah, constantly like judging other people, like wondering if they were fallen, wondering if they were Metatronic and all this stuff.
Hmm.
And once again, that is like a frequency of judgment. And therefore it's a frequency of fear.
Yep.
So what type of energy do you think that you're going to be attracting if you're constantly putting out that judgment, that fear of everything around you? So it's such a fine line, and it's one of those things like it is so fucking hard. Like it really, really is. Like,
Because
and
the
I mean,
mind wants to, it loves the stimulation and the drama and even the sense of
yeah.
purpose that sometimes we get from it.
Hmm.
And some people, I think and it's not, it's true for Keylontics and everything we do, but I think even in just normal stuff that people like the ego seeks to kind
Hmm.
of do the same thing, that compartmentalization,
Yeah.
I'm good, they're bad, this is that, this is,
Mm.
and that's kind of how it navigates and makes meaning in our lives. And so when people say, go inward or destroy the ego, they think, well, how is that even possible? And I think it's a
Mm.
balance. It's that integration process of like that inner self, our core wisdom. No, but we're knowing that we're the ones that have the experience, that we have the thoughts, that we create these egregores or aggregates, these ideas about
Mm.
things, but that somewhat subjective to us, but we can then become intentional in what we choose to energize and not energize. And
Mm.
like you were saying, that sovereign integral is that center point within us, the beingness. And the irony is, like when I said mindfulness is the first step, it's just because that's just tuning into who you are as an awareness. Like the awareness and the
Mm.
thought are two different things. The
Mm.
awareness has thoughts, and your intent is also an extension of that being. So when you go
Mm.
back to that center and that beingness, which seems so simple and almost like, how can that be any, but that is your eternal
Yeah.
source spark in the world at
Yeah.
least. And what's ironic is the deeper you get there, and it's hard because when I time myself now, I'm present for like a couple minutes a day, maybe, So I'm not
Mm.
out here like preaching like this is like, I'm the
Yeah, no, well,
best at
that's what
this.
I
And
mean. Like I was saying,
yeah,
it is hard, and it's really hard to achieve. Like, and in order to become present, you also have to make sure that you're breathing correctly.
exactly.
How many people can say that they're completely in the present moment and focused on like their inhales and exhale breaths? And I really, really like the concept of just even how simple it is. Like it's all so simple, like mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
breathing, all of these things are so simple, but it's just things that we don't practice or things that we just forget to do because we are so wired to like the fight or flight energy of our surroundings and working and this and that and being in survival mode that we
Hmm.
forget to breathe. And, that breath is literally source. Breath
It
is
really
the
is.
eternal moment. So, and I find that
Breath
when I
work.
do practice that, once again, not very much, I do instantly feel grounded and I instantly feel like, okay, I'm here right now. I'm okay. Everything's good. Let me take this next step.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, a couple of ideas as well, just in regards to what we can talk about again. But I was just thinking the topic of Jeshua 12, Jeshua 9, we don't have to go into that, but let's just call it Jesus. Just the concept
Right.
of Jesus and, who Jesus was, the personification of Jesus and how it's represented in all of these different spiritual paradigms and spiritual
Hmm.
beliefs. And then also the contrast or even the unification of what this means when it comes to other deities, like Thoth or Thoth, for example, and
Hmm.
what your opinion of that is.
Okay. It's awesome. This is a great deep topic with many facets and a lot of controversial parts. And I guess I want to start with saying that I think the core wisdom or frequency of Christ, regardless of the details, right, is I think the most important part. And
Mm,
I've met, even though contemporary kind of modern Christianity could be seen as, maybe a distortion or some things are missing or there's some narrative that was hijacked or changed or, a little, especially when you kind of mix it with the Old Testament, that there's still a lot of people that follow, I guess, the idea of Christ who can tune into that frequency. And I think sometimes they do, we do. And
mm,
even if they don't have all the other information or knowledge, and they might not be ready to take a more internal path of discovery of that, is they live by those principles and they're tuned into that frequency that he represents, then I feel they're on the same side as me. Even if they judge me and they think I'm going to hell or whatever,
mm,
if they're truly morally and spiritually in tune with that and trying to live good lives and on the side of good and don't want evil to thrive in the world, then maybe we'll disagree on the details and they can see me however they want, but I still honor and respect that. Because a lot of people, some of those aspects of the myth are very important to them, like the resurrection. It's like saying that Jesus survived is sometimes to them like destroying their faith. And I personally don't think it has to destroy the faith. I think there's way more to it than the literal part of the story. So back to that, I've always had since I was a kid an intuitive feeling there's more of a mystical thing, right? And
mm,
naturally, a lot of us are like he traveled east or he's a Buddhist or whatever, right? And in Keylontics, I know that they have different this idea that there's different Jesuses and one is lesser and one is better. Historically speaking, in terms of alternative theories from the Gnostics to kind of more secret, the Grail, right? People talk about the Grail and the lineage and Mary Magdalene and all this stuff. The way Keylontics describes it, there's not really a lot of historical basis, and it feels like they drew on a lot of things and mashed it into one idea because a lot of us naturally go, well, the normal Jesus story isn't really that resonant, but the story of a more advanced, almost new age version of him is more resonant. So the idea that there's two different ones is easier. But I see it more like there's two different stories, but it's the same being, and that the other story just wasn't told. Rather than try to divide people and say you're worse, you have bad DNA coding, and that Jesus is false and mine is real, but I have no historical. It's like I don't know. I think that could just lead in loops. So,
mm,
and I think Madeline was very important, as well as I think the mother is very important. Go into later, and I think that definitely was taken out. I think that was distorted. I think the divine feminine has been suppressed forever and still is, and that there's that aspect of ourselves that's not missing, but I think is coming back into the world. And women, the divine, the feminine, the true Sophia needs to be nurtured. And, we'll go into how that's also been turning its whole thing today. But so
mm,
Jesus, my perspective on him is, there's those missing years that at least the mainstream narrative knows about. Some people think he went east. Some people think he didn't. My opinion, and this is similar to a little bit with Ashayana too, but this comes from other sources. There's a lot of people, even some of the early Jews believe this. But of course, they viewed it in a negative light that he learned in Egypt. And what people don't know is like when I was a kid growing up in Egypt, I was always being shown that Egypt was like sorcery and this evil magic. And like, because Moses, he beat them and all that,
Mm.
the Old Testament stories, right? So, or you think of like occult stuff. But apparently, and there's, a lot of esoteric traditions that believe this, there was a school of wisdom there that was just as advanced, if not more, than let's say the one in Tibet, the one in the Himalayas, and some of the
Mm.
yogis up there. And they taught more of an alchemical version. And this goes really far back. This tradition survived all kinds of different cultures, and it kind of culminated in the center there. And these schools taught people, I guess, ascension, if you want to call it that, the mastery of the self and the being, and had it down almost to a science. And Jeshua, in a lot of these, both the traditional and alternative, like the Gnostic texts, was always thought of as just kind of like a lot of us just feel naturally in tune with certain things. We know certain things since a young age. He
Mm.
was already, wise beyond his years as a kid. So, like, the Christians don't like the idea that he learned from school or something because that means he wasn't God. But I think he already was this being, whatever you want to call it. And he's Syrian this, he's Lyran, 12 stranded. It's like, I think we're just getting, kind of caught up in details that we can't really verify right now. But
Mm.
regardless, he was a super an advanced entity that had a purpose. And I think there's
Mm.
some parts of Keylontics that are very important that are in other traditions, even the Templars, and I know that's demonized too. We'll go into that. The DNA was important, right?
Yeah.
The DNA was important for a variety of reasons, but so was the spiritual mission. Now, in the Gnostic idea, like they believe we're kind of in a matrix, very similar to Keylontics, and he came to help remind us how to escape or how to liberate ourselves or how to awaken this inner whatever you want to call it. Now, their blind side, I think, that's different from the mystical Christians. I know it's a little convoluted, is that they just believe that the world of matter, the world of the physical reality was doomed and you had to escape it, which is kind of like, like bypassing. Not all because Gnosticism is
That
such a
sounds like
big
the new
thing.
age.
A little bit, yeah. Well, there's all
Yeah.
different kinds of Gnosticism. So it's like you see that term and it's like some of them didn't think that way at all. But the real idea that the mystical Christians and like people that tuned into that part of that message was that the divine word or template could be rectified in the flesh. And that's
Mm.
what he did. Now the Christians just go, he's the only one. We just have to wait for him to save us, right? But those
Mm.
of us who are more on the mystical, esoteric side think that he did it so that we all could. And he took, in my opinion, now that
Like
everything
like
I've
a way shower.
exactly. And after
Mm.
everything that I've studied, I believe, and this, by the way, is also in their Hermetic work, thought stuff we'll get into too. But they use different symbols, but the pure version of it, right? Because there's everything gets corrupted at some point. But so possibly he showed he did it and in a way revealed the process or the template of how we can do it. And
Mm.
every person that does it, and he might have been the first or one of the few, changes, in my opinion, kind of the consciousness of the world, all of humanity. And it's almost like it stalls a frequency because that frequency is so much more powerful than all the inversions, the ego
Mm.
stuff, the violence, the death, the separation consciousness, if you want to call it. And it's possible that the DNA also, if he survived, as many people think, right? He had wives, he had children. The
Mm.
Magdalene was just as important,
Mm.
we can go into that too some other time. But if he survived and that did happen, maybe that was a very vital part of literally the genetics of humanity receiving like a boost or even an unlocking, kind of like this idea. Keylontics goes into this engineering that might have happened that suppressed us. So there
Mm.
might have been grail lineages that were set up to help in that reversing that, but it
Mm.
has to be embodied right through the individuals that are utilized. And we all have it; it's all embedded within us. But so
Yeah.
it's a kind of a morphogenetic, like collective thing that was to culminate in the future. And when he said, and even in the normal Bible, he said, "You will do greater works than I." So he's basically saying that like we all have that potential, and that if in the future we will do those greater works. The meek will inherit the earth. And the meek, by the way, is viewed in modern English as being weak, like you're just a timid little guy, But
Mm.
what it actually had more of a connotation of a gentle, spiritual, bridled power. So it's
Mm.
like, you have that, but it's not a forceful thing. And that's kind of
Mm.
what the Christ is. It's just this radiant energy that is just undisputable. And so I think a lot of people
Yeah.
naturally thought he was God because when you were in his energy field, you felt God. He completely
Mm.
embodied that. He completely embodied the source, whatever you want to call it. And people would literally cry because what happens, we're carrying all this, trauma and fears and karma and generational stuff. And the moment you're in that field, it just starts to, it can't exist in the same space. If you've
Mm.
ever, people who've done any kind of like energy work or trauma or somatic work,
Mhm.
they'll cry a lot, or they'll, release in different ways, or their bodies will move around.
Yeah.
And so I think that was, and then the few times I've experienced that on my own, I'm like, please more. But I'm sure
Yeah.
people and at that time were like, my gosh, like, when they weren't around, they thought like they had lost the love of their life or something.
Mm.
And that because it's just that frequency.
Yeah,
Um,
you make like a really good point, which is something that I've also like noticed in my personal life as well, and vice versa. Like, people that I meet or that I've met throughout my time. So the first thing I wanted to touch on as well is that I completely agree because I share the same views and resonance to the energy or the frequency of Christ. It's like I don't want to be Jesus. I'm not like waiting for Jesus to save me. I'm trying to embody the divine within my physical body so that I can therefore help others along the way from with using my own frequency, using my own power, and using my own remembrance of self. You know what I mean? Because,
mhm,
like you said, I feel like we are all connected through a morphogenetic field or DNA or whatever, but it's not about forcing, it's not about pushing it onto other people. It's about being. And once you are the I am, or once you are the being that's fully embodying this divine energy or this Christic energy, through your own body and through your vessel, people just naturally feel it. And I've had this happen to me, through people where I am in like these energies and you straight away feel your own shadow becoming uncomfortable, or somebody will say something. And like I've noticed myself be triggered in other people's presence where they'll just say something to me and it really triggers me and it makes me angry. And then I go home and I find that trigger and I like something comes out from my subconscious and I'm like, fuck, they were so right. And then as
mhm,
soon as I receive that healing, I realized that we had like a highly like healing energetic exchange. And then there's times where I do that with people, like I'll be around people and they'll just feel really uncomfortable in my presence. And we just won't be
mhm.
able to have a full on like loving exchange or a mutual exchange because they're holding so tightly onto their mask or onto their ego. They're fully connected to their ego, where they're not really able to embrace that energy or allow it into their fields. So it's interesting because I feel like this is happening a lot nowadays. I don't know if this happens to you, but it's been
Yes.
happening. Yeah, very much to me as well, but it's catalyzing my own healing and I'm therefore able to catalyze other people's healings as well. So it's like, yeah, when we think about this, or personally, when I think about this Christ energy, and I've had my own experiences with Jesus or Jeshua enough to know that this person was a real person. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
whether or not this might be like a holographic experience of myself, I
Yes.
have felt the spirit and the energy of, this entity or whatever. And it's not love and light. Like in my opinion, it's not like
Yeah. Exactly.
weak. It's not meek. It's not weak. It's
No.
like and
Powerful.
loving and it's like
Yeah.
in your
Hmm.
face and it
Hmm.
takes so much love, you know what I mean, to
Yeah.
express that from a place of love and from a place of empowerment, which is true authenticity. You know what I
Yes.
mean? There's a reason why they say that
100%.
authenticity is like one of the highest frequencies or whatever. Same with gratitude and love. It's because those
Mhm.
things are the hardest things to embody for anyone.
Exactly.
It's like, are you always acting from love? Are you always being your authentic self? Are you like practicing what you preach?
Yeah.
Like not many people can say that. So yeah,
Hmm.
I definitely fuck with that.
Yeah. I agree. That's 100%. You just nailed it all. I've been feeling the exact same way. And I think we're all a part of this, right? That's that integral process of where we are a collective. And that's one of the things some of the people associated with the original Wingmakers taught too, that there is a collective field around the planet in each and every one of us that is, I guess some people might call it an oversoul, some people call it an overfunction, but we're all in tune with it. We're all a part of it. And so we all mirror one another. And when we heal, others heal. And a lot of challenging situations are opportunities to produce the most healing. And it's not just for me, but it's also for them. And I'm
Mm,
going to use an example from a paradigm that I won't name right now because there's already an association with it, cognitive dissonance. And I had it too, so I understand. But
mm,
in this paradigm, the process of going back to source or towards God is learning to become present and aware of our internal behaviors, attitudes, perspectives, whatever, that are aligned with the giving force or the force that the desire to receive in order to give is kind of how they word it, or the one that only desires for the self. Now, when I say only desires for the self, that sounds like, well, service to self isn't bad. How can you help others if you don't heal yourself? I agree with that. It's talking more about the surface level, karmic, egoic, like superficial, kind of toxic parts of ourselves that sometimes we serve, but it's not really what we need internally to evolve and to grow. So the inverted part of us, and that you could
Mm,
kind of reverse that process by going from the self that all these little things, and in turn we open up to the ocean of that is God, right? We go from we realizing you're a pond, but there's this huge river that connects you to that, and these behaviors, this process internally of becoming more and more aligned with it, allow it to flow into us and in turn flow out into the world and change
mm,
it. And so it's the same with other people. So suddenly people start coming in your lives. They might be past or present or a challenge. And that's when the most light is produced or the healing. And ultimately the goal to bring heaven to earth, or, I guess we could call it ascension or whatever you want to call it, is that if the world went through this fall, this inversion, this fragmentation, then the goal is to repair kind of like the web of life. And we do this through our daily self and our daily interactions and our inner resonance. And that changes your
mm,
geometry naturally. It's not
mm,
intellectual. I like this geometry. It's like, no, your beingness is the geometry. That's just a
mm,
on paper 2D concept. This is that it's like that's why they use symbols in the past, because like even your ego, you can't see that like you can a muscle. I work out my muscle, you might be able to see my biceps, but I'm working on this in this resonance and this internal temple. It's hard to see that externally. I know a lot of us can see it. We can glows out of your eyes and you feel it in people's presence.
mm,
So yeah, in this paradigm, that was kind of that. You're repairing these rips and the tears of life, and you're letting source through you as the vessel come into you as you yourself radiate out by this
mm,
re-inversion process. And I thought that was interesting. And another thing that was very big is, like you said, that these conflicts and these issues and people that need this help or whatever, or even me, we assist each other in that process of producing light. And there's even Gnostic texts where Jesus talks about, like, you have to go through the underworld. So truly, like that's part of the process of then ascension again, where you're good,
mm.
those things are the tinder, the fertilizer that lead to you to blossom like a beautiful lotus or flower.
Yeah. And
It's
it's
pretty cool.
almost like, I mean, metaphorically, you could actually say that we are in the underworld right now. Like we're traversing the underworld. We are basically stuck in time. We're going in the loops. And, there's people that are trying to restore the balance whilst being in the underworld, whilst also, helping to take people through and show them a different part of life. For example, like
Exactly.
Anubis. I like the what he represents, or the deity Anubis. A lot of people,
Mhm.
whatever, demonize Anubis. He was a demon. A lot of people
Of
believe
course.
that, but in my opinion, like the concept that he represents, once again, it's the concept of weighing the heart against the feather of truth, which to
Yeah.
me is basically what we were speaking about. It's like,
Mhm.
going through the underworld and, being in like this dense, dark, negative, fragmented atmosphere, but then finding your own truth
Mhm.
and connecting with your heart and finding love and finding heaven where it looks like it's not anywhere, but it is within you. So it's like that's kind of like why I attribute the whole Anubis concept as well. It's like,
Yep.
when he was taking people through the underworld, he was basically just taking them through the lessons or the
Yeah.
experience to find themselves. And once again, not all can do that, but I feel like that's what that symbolized.
Absolutely.
Um,
I agree. A lot of those
yeah.
Egyptian gods, I think, symbolize that. And there's,
Like de
there's,
death and
yeah,
rebirth, that's what that whole concept is about.
exactly. Yeah. There's a whole, I mean, pretty much the Egyptians, in terms of their gods and their theories and their myths, when you look at it from an alchemical perspective, it's very deep. And that's why a lot of these groups, like the Rosicrucians, they took a lot of that and they modernize it for and they might even descend, and I know this is far-fetched, but from Yeshua as well, where Yeshua also inherited this wisdom. And not just that, I think what I believe about just going back real briefly to that is
Mm,
because he had this innate whatever, the truth, this radiant core source wisdom that's beyond any sort of idea, belief, or symbol, but is something we can all anchor and embody. he found those universal wisdoms, core universal principles and knowledge in all the paradigms of his time, or at least a lot of them from
Mm,
Judaism, because the Essenes had a different kind of perception of Jew. They were Jews too, right? Like, but they believed they had a more pure version, and that there was, the Herod and Rome, they were all going in this kind of materialistic way. But I believe that he in Egypt and possibly even in Europe. We won't go there right now, but different place in the East, he kind of took out the distortions and the exclusivity of everything, right? Because even in Judaism, it's like in those secret traditions, that was only for a specific group of people. In the Egyptian mystery school, you had to be an initiate and you had to be like, that it was elitist in its own way, even though it was to protect the knowledge, not have it be corrupted. I mean, I think everything gets corrupted when you have
mm,
just a small circle of people controlling it. And then
mm,
religions and this. So I think he wanted something that was open to everybody with the core
mm,
universal principles at the beginning. And yeah, you can't teach the most advanced stuff because no one would even grasp it, but gradually, go up. So I think he did that. And I think in the Egyptian school, you mentioned that the truth and in your authenticity. And I totally agree with that. There was the weighing of the heart. I think another one was at Mott. I forgot. And I think about the idea that God sees through everything and sees your heart, in the Bible. And
mm,
that's kind of how I see the universal conscious or source or field. It's just responding to who you are, your
mm,
beingness, who you're truly radiating. It's no mask of I'm this special this or I'm just special that. It's reciprocating what we're creating and being within ourselves. And so
mm,
when we're aligning ourselves with that, it too is doing the same thing. It's a two-way. And so the process of this paradigm I'm not going to name, the process of reinverting our consciousness by learning to reverse into more of a giving, a reverence for that, whatever you want to call it, it
mm,
in turn comes to us. Because it
mm.
doesn't, in this inverted fallen world, at least if we want to call it that. I don't want to call it that as it sounds like it's bad, but the planet itself is beautiful. It's our minds
This
that is in the
fucked up
underworld.
plan.
It's not the planet, right? It's our minds. Like
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
there's something
right.
going
And,
on
and
with
and
us.
that was something once again in the earlier work that I really liked in the freedom teachings, where it was basically just like we have all collectively created these thought forms, and they're in subconscious, they're in the ether, and then some of us
Mhm.
pick it up and blast. And
Right.
we've all been guilty of it. Like no
Totally.
one can say that
100%.
they've gone their entire lives thinking,
No,
beautiful rainbows and unicorn
no,
type of thoughts.
no, no.
We've all been like, fuck you, like, get fucked or whatever,
Yeah.
a curse
Hell
someone
yeah.
in our mind, if not out loud. It's like we've all created
Oh
this.
yeah.
We all need to learn to transmute it and alchemize it for the greater good, but also that takes work. There was
Yeah. There's
something
no
else
shame
I
in
was
it.
going to say as well when you were talking about this. Just in regards to, like, for example, like dark energies or dark entities and demons and stuff, like as much as I do believe that we are mirrors of our own frequency, I have also encountered, like dark beings, demons, and entities. But
Yes.
there's one thing that I have found when it comes to dealing with these energies is that once again, at the core of them, when you approach things with love, they are like afraid too and almost intimidated of us, which is why they attack us as well. You know what I
Right.
mean? And
100%.
I've seen this type of situation play out in my own life. And then sometimes a lot of these energies, they're like children that have no guidance, or children that don't really have like a source of connection,
Mhm.
which they don't, right? It's like I do believe
Right.
that these beings that, choose to do evil or live in this frequency or are in this low vibration is because they don't really have a source of inspiration or a source of connection to love and to that eternal nature. And I
Right.
believe that we can be way showers, for the negative entities and the dark entities as well, as opposed to just like casting them aside or just saying,
Or
there's just
victims,
yeah, or
Yeah.
victimizing yourself or saying like, no, it's black and white, it's good and bad, it's, evil and good. It's like, yes, some of them don't want to change and they won't change, but there's a lot of, anyway, this is what I feel
I
recently.
agree.
There's a lot of energies that are like crossing over now, or that are kind of like wanting to, in Keylontic Science terms, go through bioregenesis
Right.
or,
Yes.
activate their DNA or, become a more expanded sense of self. But it takes that work on their end, but also on our end to have the compassion and to show the light, but from our authentic, like loving selves, you know what I mean?
I
So
know.
yeah.
I completely agree with you. What you said is, I think, very important because that's something that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. And while I'm not going to go into detail of any of my experiences with that, because it's pretty wild,
Mm.
I will say that a lot of the things that you said, I totally resonate with. And in a lot of the healing that I've done, whether it's like kind of another healer or a group setting, some of those things show up, some of those things that I experienced. And I did feel it was one of those things where, look, you can come with me or you cannot. That
Mm.
I'm doing this for myself, but for you too. You know, for
Mm.
anything, all these things, we're all connected. And I do also feel that if we thought about on a greater universal level beyond duality and like why clearly we need contrasts, we need bad guys, we need polarities to experience the game of life and the subjective oneness experiencing itself as a physical vessel, whatever, right? A lot of those guys, like you said, I think are maybe not necessarily playing their role, but have taken on that frequency. Well, yeah, to be that in that part of our reality, and not just our reality, but even outside of here. There's things going on in the universe. Duality does not end on Earth,
Mm. I
but
think it's forgetfulness as well, like
yeah,
I mean, a lot of us have been here for a long time, and regardless whether you believe in reincarnation or incarnation or whatever, the people that do feel that there's something more after death, it's like, well, in my opinion, there is, because I've experienced death and I do believe in incarnations. Like I have certain memories, and I don't think that this is just me being schizophrenic or having
yeah,
dreams. Like I feel that this is my truth. And I have also found that whenever, because I do fall, because, like we fall many times. It's like we awaken and we fall, but falling, in my opinion, it's not in terms of like becoming evil. It's like
yes,
whenever I've fallen into like a low vibration or low frequency because I've been sad, depressed, angry, whatever, and I'm sitting in that frequency, it's because I have forgotten myself again.
yeah,
Because I've forgotten who it is that I am. I've forgotten my own spirit. I've forgotten my own source of light and my own connection. I have forgotten, you know what I mean? And
I
I've
agree
come
with
to these
that. Yeah,
realizations lately where I'm sitting in that energy and I'm just like, wait, hold on, like what the fuck am I doing? And then it kind of almost becomes funny, right? But
mm-hmm.
then you
It
kind of,
does.
but when if you apply that to the collective or to, everyone who has forgotten and who isn't remembering and who's stuck in like this karmic loop and who just sees the 3D world and what's in front of them and nothing else, it's like, well,
Mm,
can we really also blame them? We can't blame them because they too have also forgotten and they don't have the sparks around them or that spark of light to ignite themselves again. And I think that's where
exactly.
we come in, and people that, are the way showers or the guides or whatever, I don't even think that there's any hierarchy. I just feel like some of
No,
us agreed
exactly.
to take the first steps so then others could follow. Like we have followed other steps, and then it's just going to continue like going and
It's a
going. I
snowball.
mean, maybe Jeshua
Hmm.
was the first one. Who knows what was
Yeah,
before him? But,
yeah,
it's just been like a trickling effect of
exactly.
awakening.
Yeah, 100%. You're 100% right. I like what you said, when you're talking about how there's, the suffering and what people are going through and how they don't have, you know, they might not because they're so, I mean, it's like someone living in a third world country that's just in a constant state of violence. It's hard for them to even like get to the
Mm,
point where they can sit down and even have a conversation like this. So it's very, but it is collective and it is morphogenetic. And I feel like the more of us that do this work, if you want to call it that, the more contagious it is. It's more powerful because it taps
mm,
into the whole field. Whereas when we're in a state of, not suffering, but whatever you want to call it, we're sort of only in our own energy space and it's like this and like that. And we're kind of
mm,
triggering one another. We're, chords are being created and all this, but the harmony, the harmonic energy is infinitely more powerful because it can tap into
mm,
the energy of the whole. And so it only takes a small amount of people to have a greater effect. And it's
mm,
possible that we're talking about egregores or agendas, they're constantly using methods of these triggering of these extreme events in the outer reality in
mm,
divisive ways to keep people from harmonizing in this way. And to herd, it takes a lot more people to manifest these negative, whatever you want to call it, events, but that's why I think that fear energy and the destructive energy is so powerful there. But for
mm,
us, I think the more people that come online, the more it begins to shift, and it just takes less of us, and the more we tune in, the better it is. And I think that's one of the reasons, I think when we talked about this a little bit, why I think it's important in spiritual or alternative communities, people that want this world to change, spiritual level, physical level, whatever, to be careful in the divisive mentalities and rhetoric. And even if we disagree on the details, to
Mm,
find that core unifying themes and wisdom and
mm,
intent and work through that. We're talking about manifestation, learn. It's more powerful in groups.
mm.
So if we, the people who are on the cutting edge of this process, kind of can't get over ourselves and just talk like soul to soul, and
Yeah,
whether we
that's the calling
disagree,
I've been getting recently as well. Like I've been feeling like we really need to come together as well, especially like within the Indigo, the Indigo Shield or whatever. There's
mm,
just such a divide, with like all of these. To be honest, it mainly is Keylontic Science. I feel like Keylontic Science has formed such a divide because it's like, well, it's like the 2012 post and pre divide, and now there's like a
yeah.
new divide, and
And there's
there's all
Lisa
of these.
Renee, and
Yeah,
a
and
million,
even
tons of offshoots.
even just the whole like ascension paradigms and the evac passages and who is who and who's going where and
Who's bad? Who's false light?
yeah,
Who's
like
hijacked?
I mean, look, I do believe that some people are hijacked.
Totally,
I'm not gonna
totally, totally.
lie.
No, I agree with
But
that.
I think that the rest of the people who are, wanting to do something, it's kind of like we really do need to come together and talk about it. And this is what's frustrating to me. It's because like I just sort of I want us all to come together, but like you said, we have like those ego blocks or like those mental blocks because we are holding so tightly onto like one belief
Hmm.
and one paradigm or a specific mechanic technical process to things that we're kind of blocked from
I agree.
ourselves, right? Because we are connected, but we can't be connected if we're
Yeah,
blocked.
exactly. And that's kind of why I've gone back to simplicity, and why I think whether it's Keylontics or this or that, Kabbalah, it doesn't matter. There's core universal principles that any of us can
Mm,
learn and embody and work through that will pretty much end all that division. And
mm,
it's like the
mhm,
12 attitudes and responsibilities. When I was deep in it, it was kind of almost like, oh, yeah, you should embody these, but it was more like an optional thing. Like the focus was on these techniques and this and that. What I've learned from everything that I've studied, all the people who achieve these things, whether it was in, the saints over here, the saints over there, the sages in China, in Tibet, the virtues weren't optional. Actually, there was the core of the work, because it's just like
mm,
the sovereign integral. And it's not even about being good on the outside or not. It's if you want to change your inner geometry and your relationship to source and to the universal fields, then that's how you do it, through mastering or working through. And by the way, in Kabbalah, it's different than Keylontics, right? And I know the structure of the tree of life is off and all that. I get that. But the spheres didn't really represent, at least in the traditional way, frequencies or chakras or energy flows. They were just archetypes of different stages of consciousness or principles that you work through. And they had their inverse. They had their satanic, the Qliphoth, the demonic tree, which were the obstacles to that. And so you work through your own inversions and move through them, and you focus on like if it's beauty of the sphere's wisdom, you work through that lesson in your life, and they might show up, and there might be an opportunity, someone does this and someone does that. And so if you transfer that to the 12 attitudes and responsibilities or whatever, right, you would create, let's say, a set of techniques for that particular sphere, whatever it is. I don't know, I forget some of them, but let's just say compassion or something. How can
mm,
I apply this in my thinking? Not just your actions, that's extremely important, obviously the most important part, but in my beingness, like my intent itself, like
mm,
shadow work can be very subtle, but it will change you drastically. Like I think about my own triggers or even unconscious reactions. An easy one that we all do or that we've all done is get on Facebook or something, and you see someone doing really well or whatever. And you're like, man, I wish I was doing well. And there's a little bit of envy, and I
mm,
might even subconsciously be like, I hope they don't slow down on your success. Chill out, bro. You're leaving me behind or something. But there's
mm,
that's a little bit of like a negative, the opposite of wishful thinking, but you can flip that.
mm.
You can
Yeah,
choose, you know what? I hope the best for them or whatever it is. And
yeah,
that more so frees your energy, and it
mm,
changes the way your energy starts to interact,
yeah.
even on a non-physical level.
Yeah,
And so
when you
that's,
start to view yourself as unique as well, like when you actually truly understand that you are also a unique piece of, divine manifestation, and you think that person's doing amazing, like fuck, whatever, they're doing better than me. But then you can flip it and just say, wait, I've got my own unique gifts and abilities, and I'm
Exactly.
going to create and do something awesome in divine timing, or not. Or maybe my purpose is
Or
just to
whatever I want to
fucking
do, right?
be here and not work
Yeah.
and just be a fucking
Yeah.
goddess and just chill. You know what I
And
mean?
I'm
Like,
happy for them,
yeah,
that's what
that's
you
what I
do,
mean. Like
right?
every
Yeah,
different people have different perceptions of happiness. Like some people really
exactly.
want like success and recognition and fame and all of that. But to other people, happiness might just literally just be sitting at home, having their health, having their comfort,
Yeah.
having
Just
their
chilling.
snacks and just being by
Yeah.
themselves. That's what I mean. It's
100%.
just as different for all of us.
Yeah.
All right, so this is about to just cut out in a minute. So
Okay.
I'm just going to stop and then I'll exit and come back.